This episode is brought to you by my friends at Patreon. If you'd like to join them and get early audios of upcoming episodes, please see the link in the description. The heathen write that the comet must arise from natural causes, but God creates not one that does not foretoken a sure calamity. Martin Luther. The smell seemed otherworldly. The house was immaculate. Not a scrap of trash left in the bins, not a spot on wall or floor. Everything was in its proper place. And yet the stench of death hung in the air, as if over a battlefield. Calvin Vine, chief investigator for the medical examiner's office of Rancho Santa Fe, a town of about 3,000 just outside San Diego, had been told to expect 10 dead bodies in the property he had entered, all men. He found 39, both men and women, some of whom had been castrated. Each was dressed identically in black shirts and sweatpants, brand new black and white Nike Decades, an armband declaring membership of the Heaven's Gate away team, and a black shroud placed over their faces. None showed any signs of violence. Their hands had been respectfully arranged over their chests. The decomposition suggested that the deaths had occurred in batches, performed over 4 days. It was soon clear that every one of them had committed suicide, the largest mass suicide on American soil. They were members of a new religious movement called Heaven's Gate, whose theology comprised an unwieldy mixture of Christianity and UFO mythology. The group were cyber-savvy and funded themselves with a web design business. Far from mere notes, their final missives to their loved ones were full video productions, each outlining the reason for their respective mortal missteps. It was all to do, you see, with a comet. The year was 1996. Millennial fever was burning, and, in keeping with such times, in January of that year, a great comet appeared in our night skies, the brightest for a generation. For over 16 months, this graceful, swan-like vision, christened Hale-Bopp, hung serenely in our skies, and seated our collective soul with both wonder and hysteria. In November 1997, an amateur astronomer named Chuck Schramek called Art Bell's paranormal radio show Coast to Coast AM, claiming to have imaged a, quote, Saturn-like object behind Hale-Bopp. What he'd actually found, according to the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, was a well-known star, though apparently not known to his sky viewing program, likely due to badly set user preferences. None of that mattered, of course. Subsequent photos, many doctored, began circulating through the still primitive internet, and soon the idea that Hale-Bopp was the herald of an alien visitation became common knowledge. It was this supposed visitation, the Heaven's Gate followers claimed, that was the trigger for their lethal lark. Their leader, Marshall Applewhite, who preferred to be called Doe, as in Doe a deer, claimed the arrival was their equivalent of the Second Coming, and that to join it, they would have to strip off their bodies, Little Prince style, and waft their souls into space. In the aftermath, 4 other people would follow them. Because of its somewhat preposterous underpinnings, the phrase away team was a reference to Star Trek, the Heaven's Gate cult has been largely viewed as an object of fun. Even The Simpsons parodied it. Nevertheless, it was a tragedy. 43 people's lives were snuffed out because a comet created an internet meme. And it wouldn't be the last to do so. In the early 2010s, 2 comets, Comet Elenin and Comet Ison, which in any sane time would have gone unnoticed by the public, were woven into the long-running doomsday mythologies of Nibiru and the 2012 apocalypse. Both comets ultimately disintegrated after passing too close to the sun, so at least one mythic story was honored, and no disasters triggered. The word disaster means evil star, and throughout history, no stars were imbued with more malevolence than bearded stars, or asteres cometes. Given how eagerly we await their arrivals these days, this may seem strange. Why would such beautiful, gossamer visions be seen as evil? To understand why, you must see the world as the ancients did. Ancient eyes were far more attuned to the cycles of nature than ours are today. Most modern people, and I include myself in this, spend more time in virtual worlds, or in worlds of comfortable artificiality, than they do in what we now call the natural world, but which, until recently, was simply the world. If you study the world long enough, and ancient people had little else to study, you will notice patterns, not only in the sky, but in the ripening of fruits, the falling of leaves, the migrations and rutting of animals, the arrival and disappearances of various fish, and even the weather. These patterns would form the basis for your subsistence. The world was survivable because it was predictable. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were savvy enough to keep time by the phases of the moon, while Neolithic farmers, with their monuments, kept track of the movement of the sun. It is possible that these proto-civilizations were aware of the motions of the lesser wandering luminaries we now call planets, though if they were, we do not know. Over time, these observable patterns in the sky, which, being predictable, are at least partially controllable, went from marking earthly events to portending those events. If a baby was born deformed, people looked to the sky for an answer. If crops failed, or the rain ceased, the cycles of the sky were consulted. As civilization dawned, some would come to doubt the role of the stars in shaping earthly events, and to these doubters, astronomers such as Ptolemy would argue that the two greatest stars in the sky, the sun and the moon, clearly influenced the earthly realm. The sun determined not only when the crops ripened, but also what clothes you wore, and whether you grew apples or grapes. The moon created the tide and marked the life cycles of animals, while the fixed stars, with their annual appearances from behind the sun, told farmers when to reap, and travelers when to avoid the sea. In a time before germ theory, climatology, or scientific medicine, astrology, as astronomy was then known, was the only testable, predictable science. Ptolemy and his fellow ancient Greek astrologers didn't view their vocation as mystical or divine. It was an extrapolation of the same forces that the Greeks believed ruled all events on Earth. Earth, air, fire, water, heat, cold, wetness, and dryness all had as much to do with the planets as with the world around them. Mars's fiery nature and nearness to the sun made it hot and dry. The moon, receiving both the light and heat of the sun and the vapors from the earth, was hot and moist. Saturn, so distant from the sun, was cold and dry, while Jupiter, ideally placed between them, was of a temperate nature. Mars's desiccating dryness caused burning and destruction, while its heat triggered the passions of men's hearts, leading to violence and conflict. Now, into this settled, predictable, seemingly natural order, insert comets. They were interlopers. They appeared at random, anywhere in the sky, as if from nowhere. They shifted and twisted their forms as they moved from horizon to horizon, only to disappear as quickly as they had appeared. They were disruptive. They were intrusions into a world that made sense. They forced philosophers to ask uncomfortable questions. If the sky could present as randomly as the earth, might the same laws govern the heavens? No. Comets were intruders. They were alien. They had no true place in the cosmos. They operate effects like those of Mars and Mercury, wrote Ptolemy. Exciting wars, heated and turbulent dispositions in the atmosphere, and in the constitutions of men, with all their evil consequences, the parts of the zodiac in which they may be posited when they first appear, and the direction and inclination of their trains point out the regions and places liable to be affected by the events that they threaten. Aristotle would have none of comets. He wrote of them not in his On the Heavens, but in Meteorology, his study of earthly weather. Quote, "A comet is formed when the upper motion introduces into a gathering of this kind a fiery principle, not of such excessive strength as to burn up much of the material quickly, nor so weak as to soon be extinguished. We may compare these phenomena to a heap or mass of chaff into which a torch is thrust, or a spark thrown. This is what a shooting star is like. The fuel is so inflammable that the fire runs through it quickly in a line. Now, if this fire were to persist instead of running through the fuel and perishing away, its course through the fuel would stop at the point where the latter was densest. Such is a comet, like a shooting star that contains its beginning and end in itself." A comet, according to Aristotle, was merely a disturbance in the upper atmosphere, a shiver in the upper realm of fire, analogous in modern terms to an aurora borealis. Quote, "The fact that comets, when frequent, foreshadow wind and drought must be taken as an indication of their fiery constitution," he wrote, attributing to their heat the winds that brought a tsunami to the northern Peloponnese in 373 BC. Pliny the Elder, the Roman natural historian who famously died trying to observe the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, wrote, "Sometimes there is a comet in the western sky, usually a terrifying star, not easily expiated. For instance, during the civil disorder in the consulship of Octavius, 87 BC, and again during the war between Pompey and Caesar, or in our day about the time of the poisoning which secured the bequest of the empire by Claudius Caesar to Domitius Nero, and thereafter during Nero's principate, shining almost continuously and with a terrible glare." Amusingly, Seneca the Younger, one of the few to employ inductive reasoning to challenge many of Aristotle's assumptions on comets, such as noting that, if comets were truly atmospheric, they would be affected by the wind, but they clearly are not, taught the young Nero ethics, and proclaimed upon the arrival of said comet that it has, quote, "redeemed comets from their bad character, as it appeared during the joyous reign of Nero." And before you assume that planetary cometophobia is a trait unique to the West, in 1972 in southern China, a silk book dating from around 300 BC was found in an ancient tomb, and listed the various malefic effects of comets, including war, famine, rebellion, and the death of kings. And no, there is no evidence that it was the result of Greek cultural contact. The Romano-Jewish historian Josephus records a comet that appeared over Jerusalem in 66 AD, quote, "resembling a sword, which stood over the city and continued a whole year. He saw the comet as one of a string of portents for the destruction of the Second Temple and the subsequent scattering of the Jewish population in 70 AD. But, he groans in his work, The Wars of the Jews, like men infatuated, without either eyes to see nor minds to consider, the Jews did not regard the denunciations that God had made to them." Incidentally, that comet was Halley's comet, and it would go on to portend omens of great auspice for centuries to come, most notably in 1066, when it heralded the final destruction of Anglo-Saxon England. Aylmer of Malmesbury, a Benedictine monk who reportedly broke both his legs as a child when, assuming the myth of Daedalus to be literal fact, he strapped some wings on his arms and jumped off a tower, addressed Halley when it first appeared. "You've come, you source of tears to many mothers. It is long since I saw you, but as I see you now, you are much more terrible, for I see you brandishing the downfall of my country." Some have speculated this meant he must have seen the comet before as a child, but since comets were not known to be periodic at the time, this seems unlikely. If you thought Edmund Halley's correct prediction of his comet's return in 1758 would have finally quelled planetesimal paranoia, you'd be wrong. Oh, there were stirrings of rationality. In his 1722 book, A Journal of the Plague Year, Daniel Defoe recounts that 2 comets appeared before the Plague and Fire of London in 1665 and 1666 respectively. Quote, "Those 2 comets passed directly over the city, and that so very near the houses that it was plain to many they imported something peculiar to the city alone. But I could not at the same time carry these things to the height that others did, knowing too that natural causes are assigned by the astronomers for such things, and that their motions and even their revolutions are calculated, or pretended to be calculated, so that they cannot be so perfectly called the forerunners or foretellers, much less the procurers of such events as pestilence, war, fire, and the like. Nonetheless, people still manage to find new ways to be terrified by comets. In 1773, Jérôme Lalande, who had recently, thanks to a transit of Venus, precisely fixed the distance to the Sun, published a pamphlet in which he attempted to calculate the chances of a comet striking the Earth, or, in what he considered a more likely possibility, passing close enough to Earth for their gravity to raise gargantuan tidal waves. This was before we understood just how small comets actually were. His numbers, from 1 in 76,000 to as low as 1 in 8,000, seem alarmingly high today, but according to Lalande were, quote, "not enough to enter the moral order of hopes or fears." Subsequent astronomers, using more detailed calculations, arrived at a figure roughly 10 times less likely. Pierre-Simon Laplace pointed out that over time, even such infinitesimally small numbers could become large. Unsurprisingly, when news of this pamphlet leaked, it created a panic. Lalande, a responsible scientist, attempted to douse this fire. In a letter published in the Gazette de France, he wrote, quote, "It is impossible to assign the epochs of such events. The next comet whose return is expected is the one which should return in 18 years. But it is not one of those which can hurt the Earth." It was too late. Soon, terrified Parisians were hammering his door, and that of the local archbishop, demanding answers both secular and divine. The archbishop was about to agree to hold a 40-day prayer vigil to avert catastrophe. The Academy of Sciences informed him that, quote, he would bring ridicule upon himself and upon science if he did so. Soon, prophets were declaring Paris's imminent destruction, some of whom offered to purchase seats in heaven for outrageous sums. The following October, a comet would appear in the skies of Paris, but it proved to be, well, just another comet. No other comet panic has had a more lasting effect on history than the great Halley's comet hysteria of 1910. I've already made 2 videos on the subject, but in summary, Halley's Comet's 1910 return was the first since the invention of spectroscopy, the technology that allowed the chemical composition of space objects to be read from their light. And among the many basic compounds found within Halley's churning, boiling fog was carbon nitride, otherwise known as cyanogen. Given that Earth was expected to pass through Halley's tail, public reaction to this discovery was understandably skittish. When a series of overconfident statements by the perpetually excitable science communicator Camille Flammarion got massively misquoted in the press, leading the New York Times to state that cyanogen might, quote, snuff out all life on the planet, that skittishness turned to outright hysteria. Sales of gas masks skyrocketed, while quacks sold comet pills and comet umbrellas to gullible customers. Of course, Earth ultimately passed through the comet's tail without incident, as every scientist, including Flammarion, had predicted. And then, for 87 years, nothing. Comets came and went, epocally beautiful wonders like Comet West in 1976, or dazzlingly bright beacons like Ikaia Secchi in 1965, but none with any associated panic. Their scientific contributions were many, but went largely unnoticed by the public. It seemed as if science had finally put comet hysteria to bed. So what happened? What changed in 1997? I think we all know. Not since the printing press sent witch hysteria viral in the 16th century has a telecommunications revolution so clobbered human reason. The heavens gators were merely ahead of the curve. They were net denizens before that term was ubiquitous. Today, with trust in governments at an all-time low, people are more likely to prefer their own collective realities, constructed online, to those offered by formerly trusted institutions such as medicine, mass media, and science. This video isn't about that, but that does inform where this video goes from here, i.e., to 3I Atlas. I must admit, I initially had no interest in covering our third detected interstellar object. I had already covered the first, which was astonishingly odd, in 2017, and the second, which was refreshingly boring, in 2019. Boring in that it was obviously, and in all conceivable ways, just a comet, showing that interstellar objects need not also lead to speculation about alien spacecraft. Were we in earlier times, 2I Borisov would have set the soothsayer stock soaring, as it arrived 4 months before the COVID-19 pandemic. A coincidence thankfully noted by no one. I do not like controversy, particularly in fields with such long wait times and often ambiguous results as planetary science. So when 3I Atlas arrived, I heaved a sigh of relief. It was, transparently, also just a comet. It had a tail, for crying out loud. And then 1I Oumuamua, our first ever interstellar object, was wild. It was long, narrow, and dark, produced no obvious coma, and appeared to rotate so quickly that initial speculation suggested it must be made of something incredibly dense, like metal. And then it accelerated against the pull of gravity, presumably due to solar pressure, but still without a coma. So yes, it's not surprising that many people pondered if it might be alien technology, something that we are never likely to completely resolve. Borisov, as I said, was just a comet. And Atlas? Why would anyone be interested in Atlas? Right. Let's get the easy stuff out of the way first. Atlas was discovered on the 1st of July, 2025, by a team led by Darryl Seligman of Michigan State University, employing, well, ATLAS, the acronym for the rather alarmingly titled Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a NASA-funded web of robotic telescopes operated by the University of Hawaii, designed to detect small to mid-range impactors, Tunguska-sized, as it were, weeks before arrival. It was immediately apparent that the new object was peculiar. Comets with hyperbolic orbits enter the inner solar system all the time, but few are as hyperbolic as this. To be hyperbolic, that is, to have a path through the solar system that will never loop back on itself, requires that the comet possess an eccentricity value greater than 1. Atlas's eccentricity value was 6.2, making it, from our perspective, virtually straight. Bar a gravitational tug by the sun, it really could have been just passing through. And quickly. Its speed relative to the sun is 58 kilometers per second, the fastest speed ever recorded for a comet. This one fact clinched that 3I Atlas had to be an interstellar object. There was no way the sun could hold on to anything traveling that quickly. Its direction of travel suggests it may have originated in the so-called thick disk, a mist-like fog of stars above and below our galaxy's main disk. The stars of the thick disk are far older than our sun, suggesting that, if Atlas originated in such a system, it would be the oldest comet ever recorded, at up to 7.6 billion years. However, given the pinball-esque conditions of the galactic traffic lanes, any such assumption must be taken as preliminary at best. Studies have suggested that Atlas has passed through at least 62 stars in the last 10 million years, though it is unlikely to have suffered major gravitational perturbation in the last 4.3 million years. Just a day later, on July 2, 2025, none other than Jane Luu and David Jewitt, the team that identified the first officially classified Kuiper Belt object in 1992, confirmed 3I Atlas as active, showing that it had developed a diffuse tail. On July 21, 2025, the Hubble telescope viewed it and managed to secure a maximum diameter of its nucleus of 5.6 kilometers, though previous estimates had placed the value as high as 20 kilometers. Precovery images from TESS, NASA's successor to the Kepler spacecraft, showed cometary outgassing months before it had been initially discovered, when it lay beyond the orbit of Jupiter, much farther from the Sun than is typical for comets in our solar system, suggesting that, while our system's comets are primarily composed of water, Atlas must be primarily composed of far more volatile materials, such as carbon dioxide. This was later confirmed by James Webb, which showed the ratio of CO2 to water in Atlas's coma was roughly 8:1, the highest ever recorded in a comet. Another chemical oddity found in Atlas by Earth-based ultraviolet telescopes was that, while nickel was detected in its coma, iron was not. Iron and nickel form together in supernova explosions, and so are always found together. This deficiency was noted at the time, though many speculated it would be corrected by later observations. And, as of me writing this, iron has just been detected in Atlas's coma. That isn't to say that Atlas isn't weird. A beautiful shot of Atlas taken during a lunar eclipse in Namibia showed it glowing green. Green comets are not unusual, but their hue is usually due to dicarbon, 2 carbon atoms stuck together, which has not been detected in Atlas. The most likely answer is that dicarbon hasn't been found yet, but other, more exotic molecules may yet reveal themselves. Another oddity of Atlas's composition is that it produces an antitail, an eruption of material upwind of the Sun. They're counterintuitive, and rare, but occasionally the dust particles comprising a comet's nucleus are large enough to not be strongly affected by the solar wind, and thus remain in a disk within the comet's orbital plane. Many comets have developed similar antitails, including Hale-Bopp and R.N. Roland. So, after doing what I hoped was an adequate job outlining the various ways in which 3 Atlas presents its cometness, I now have to talk about whether it is an alien spacecraft. As a rule, I don't bother with debunking. I'm not a scientist, and there are as many contested claims about this object as there are YouTube videos about it, not all of which will have easily accessible responses. I don't have the background knowledge to refute claims other scientists don't bother with. That said, I didn't think I could make a video about this much-requested topic without bringing it up. To talk about the 3I Atlas comet panic, we must first talk about Avi Loeb. Any video or news article referring to it in any capacity whatsoever will ultimately mention Avi Loeb, simply because he is the only credited scientist who entertains the idea that it may be an alien spacecraft. Avi Loeb is not an independent researcher with a self-published book and a degree in weirdology from a diploma mill. He's an accredited theoretical physicist with several prizes, fellowships, and professorships to his name, and is currently director of the Institute of Theory and Computation at Harvard Center for Astrophysics. Loeb is an interesting guy who I've praised in the past for his willingness to embrace outlandish ideas. But there comes a moment when even I, a non-credited layperson, must draw a line. And that line is through an archive preprint he and 2 fellow physicists posted. I say posted because it is yet to be published by a peer-reviewed journal, and given that the editor of the Notes for the American Astronomical Society recently told him they won't accept his papers again without edits, it is unlikely to be in the future, barely 2 weeks after the object's discovery, entitled, "Is the Interstellar Object 3I Atlas Alien Technology?" In it, he argues that the idea of Atlas being alien tech is testable, as indeed it is, and many of his arguments for his case, that it is too large to be an asteroid, that it shows no evidence of cometary outgassing, and that its chemical composition is strange, have since been tested and refuted by subsequent observations. Given that, his initial argument that the observed coma was possibly due to motion blur was a bit of a slap in the face to David Jewitt, who has been looking at distant, icy solar system objects for longer than Loeb has had a career. The only one of Loeb's initial claims that hasn't been directly refuted is that its orbit seems suspiciously close to the ecliptic plane, where the planets lie. But, as Hank Green pointed out, Atlas was specifically designed to observe objects in that plane, and there's no reason to assume that 3I Atlas was not one of several interstellar comets traveling through our solar system at that time, and just happened to be the only one we saw. But you know what? He may be right. All the evidence suggesting 3I Atlas is just an ordinary comet could be a distraction, and it may yet reveal its true nature. And that, frankly, would be awesome! And on the 29th of October, by when, the gods of YouTube willing, this video should be out, we will have our answer. As that is when 3I Atlas will reach perihelion, and, according to Loeb, when it will be optimally placed to perform a reverse solar oberth, a hypothetical maneuver in which an interstellar object brakes at its highest speed to lock itself in orbit around a star. In that same article, Loeb concludes with, quote, 3I Atlas appears most likely to be a natural comet. Which is nice. It's a shame that, in his initial article, after arguing that it could be alien tech, he wrote, quote, according to the so-called dark forest resolution to the Fermi paradox, that they are malign would be more likely, as it would neatly explain the singular lack of success of the SETI initiative to date. This I cannot forgive. The dark forest hypothesis, that the reason we have not detected any signs of intelligent life in the universe is because they are all laying low to protect themselves from hostile predatory civilizations, is just one explanation for the Fermi paradox out of many. And even if Atlas were found to be alien tech, would be a reason for caution, not paranoia. As it is, with paranoia blowing up the internet in the wake of Loeb's claims, it was irresponsible, particularly since it had no relation whatsoever to the content of the article and was based on no evidence. Frankly, if the creators of Atlas truly bade us ill intent, you'd think that they would have done a better job of hiding it, or at least sent their probe closer to Earth than 1.8 AU, roughly the closest distance to the asteroid Ceres. For all the ephemeral beauty they offer us, mankind has been perennially ungrateful to comets. They are a history-spanning monument to mankind's desire to find fear and misery in even the most beautiful things. For a time it seemed we had put that behind us, and begun to view comets as captivating, perplexing, even a little boring. And then the internet reformed the world into a new medieval patchwork of ideological fiefdoms, adrift in a sea of digital banditry. In a way, Comet Atlas and its ilk have reverted our understanding to medieval levels as well. Like the comets of old, they are unpredictable interlopers from the unknown depths of space. They are not of our realm, and have no reason to conform to our expectations. None of the three we have found is like the other, and none resemble comets in our solar system. They are messengers from a universe that is chaotic, alien, and indifferent to our ever less relevant world. Perhaps a spacecraft, whatever its intent, would be a more comforting revelation.